Welcome back, students. This is Module 2.2.1, Introduction to Cellular Transport. If you look at the image on the screen, you can see that it might pass for pop art, but in fact it is an artistic likeness of two cells. One cell up here, a second cell down here, and this space here with all these molecules in it is intercellular space, a space between cells. Shows various types of transport. When you finish a lecture, you should be able to come back and comprehend what types of transport are occurring here and the different types of proteins that are facilitating that. But before we get to that, let's talk about some cell functions. This list certainly is not comprehensive, but cells do perform many functions. Included among them are metabolism, cell division, which of course is the basis of reproduction. They also perform respiration, cellular respiration, which is how the energy in food is made available to cells. This is really a subset of metabolism. Certainly they perform synthesis, which also may be argued that it is a subset of metabolism. Many of the things that occur in cells are chemical, and remember, metabolism is all the chemical reactions that occur inside a cell. Packaging of the chemicals that are manufactured occurs, and certainly transport of various items. And transport is a fundamental function that is performed by membranes. Membrane physiology, which is a study of membrane function, is an important aspect of cellular biology. Our study here, we're going to start by looking at the cell membrane, also called the plasma membrane because it encloses the cell and the cytoplasm inside. So the plasma membrane encloses the cytoplasm, but we will preferentially call it the cell membrane. This is the membrane that surrounds the cell and is composed of a phospholipid bilayer. That should have meaning for you after our introduction in the chemistry portion of the lecture. We will give you a little bit of a reminder on what phospholipids are and what they do. In any case, in addition to the phospholipid bilayer, there are also embedded proteins in the cell membrane, and this is the major structure of cellular transport. So here's our little crash course reminder of phospholipids. Remember, a phospholipid has a backbone of glycerol, and glycerol makes 3 bonds. Not that you necessarily need to know that, but there are. And 2 of them are attached to fatty acid chains or fatty acid tails, and then to a head, which is polar. This happens to be a phosphate head, but that's probably not a real critical fact here. So there's the fatty acid tails we can see down there. And these are 2 different representations in the diagram here. On the left is showing each atom, and on the right is kind of the conceptual depiction of a phospholipid that I tend to prefer. And for our class, Bio 101, that's a perfect depiction. Of course, in addition to the 2 fatty acid tails, which you should recall have have non-polar bonds, strike that, have non-polar bonds, and therefore are hydrophobic. And then there is the phosphate head, which has polar bonds and is hydrophilic or water-loving. And just a reminder there, the tails are hydrophobic and the head is hydrophilic. Now, if we look at how a phospholipid bilayer might function, this depiction in the top right corner of this slide shows just phospholipids. It shows the hydrophilic heads outward and the hydrophobic tails inward away from the water. And if we had a large water-soluble molecule that had polar covalent bonds, it might be attracted to the heads, but then it couldn't go further because it would be repelled by the hydrophobic tails. And such a molecule might not be able to get into a cell if the membrane were composed only of a phospholipid bilayer. But in fact, such molecules do enter cells, and it's because the structure is more complex than just the phospholipid bilayer. In addition to the phospholipids, there are also proteins embedded. So having the proteins embedded in the cell membrane allow various types of molecules to pass through the membrane. Here's a little model. It shows this molecule might be nonpolar, and it can go right through the hydrophobic region. This one might be hydrophilic and can't go through there, and so it needs a special carrier protein. This one, this large molecule, doesn't have any way to get through, and so we see. We have a name for the depiction, for a conceptual model of the cell membrane. We call it the fluid mosaic model, and it describes the structure of the cell membrane, and it simply says that membrane proteins are embedded within the lipid bilayer, phospholipid bilayer. The phospholipid bilayer is fluid, and the word fluid here doesn't necessarily mean liquid, it means changeable. And in fact, the phospholipids are always moving around. The proteins embedded within the bilayer form a pattern or a mosaic. Here's a tile mosaic. This is a Roman tile mosaic, maybe from Pompeii or maybe from Antioch. I think Pompeii. But in any case, it shows a picture from tiles being stuck in. The mosaic in the phospholipid bilayer, the fluid mosaic model, is not nearly so aesthetically pleasing. It's a bunch of proteins stuck in there. So the question is asked here, do you comprehend the fluid mosaic here? So the fluid portion are the phospholipids, and each individual phospholipid moves around. I mean, in a matter of seconds, they will move around on this side back and forth. And we can see the large proteins, the mosaic of proteins that are stuck in there. There are other structures that are labeled here that we're not going to worry a lot about at this point in time. And that's going to conclude our first module on cell transport, and we will continue this later.